Hello, I'm Sarah Marie Maffesoli from Doctor of the World France. In December 2019, after the exhaustion of internal remedies, 261 sex workers filed a complaint in front of the European Court of Human Rights for violation of their fundamental rights due to the criminalization of clients. The sex workers came from over 20 different nationalities, many of them without a residency permit in France, meaning that they face the risk of deportation by sharing their name with France. But they did, as their lives were at risk. As evidence, in 2018, 2 years after the law came into force, the plaintiff submitted a report by two researchers demonstrating the high level of impact of criminalization of clients on the living and working condition of sex workers. This study showed that sex workers had to work longer hours to earn less, that 78% were more precarious, that only 62% succeeded in systematically imposing condoms compared with 95% previously, and that 42% considered themselves more exposed to gender-based violence. This report is not only the evidence provided by the sex workers in support of their petition, in support of their request they have submitted. Testimonials from sex workers who, because of stigmatization, were unable to join the complaints. Reports from sex workers association and allies documenting the impact of the law on the people engaged in sex work. Reports from human rights organizations such as La Ligue des Droits de l'Homme and Amnesty International. Academic research published in various reviews, among them The Lancet. Statement issued by French institutions for the protection of fundamental rights, such as the French Advisory Committee on Human Rights and the Ombudsman. Recommendations from UN bodies such as WHO, UNAIDS, UNDP. In addition to the sex workers organization, amicus curiae briefs were filled by health, human rights, and feminist organization, researcher, and the special rapporteur on the right to health. Since the end of the debates, many other institutions have spoken out in favor of the rights of sex workers and therefore decriminalization of sex work. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Form of Slavery, the Working Group Against Discrimination Against Women and Girls of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe. This massive mobilization in favor of the fundamental rights of sex workers is based on the evidence that the decriminalization of sex work, the criminalization of sex work violates human rights. It also makes sex workers more vulnerable to exploitation. Even opponents of sex workers' rights recognize that the absence of clients has a negative impact on sex workers. They acknowledge that this during COVID, but they refuse to draw the consequences, preferring their ideology and their racist, sexist project for society. The court could have made this a historic moment by joining this cohort of defenders of fundamental rights, because that's what it is all about, protecting the fundamental rights of sex workers, protecting the human rights of people who are denied them because of their activity. But the court betrayed us. It betrayed fundamental rights and its mission. It betrayed sex workers by refusing to consider the enormous amount of evidence brought before it and is requesting for even more evidence. The court does recognize the negative impact of criminalization of clients on sex workers, but it's hiding behind the national margin of appreciation. However, France is now clearly under the radar, and the impact of criminalization of clients should be more seriously monitored, as the court highlights. It also recognized that a mere criminalization of sex work would be against the Convention. We advocate for full decriminalization of sex work. As an ally, Doctor of the World France will not betray sex workers. I assure you that we will continue the fight until sex workers are able to enjoy their fundamental rights, until sex work is decriminalized.
Hi, everyone. Do you hear me? So first of all, I would like to show you all the photo of Geraldine. This trans woman, she's sex worker, migrant, living in France, in Paris, and she was killed recently. So I will say her name again. Her name was Geraldine. She was murdered in Paris last week. A trans migrant from Peru have to live in poverty and have to end her life because of this law. Geraldine, Vanessa, Jessica, Saba, and all the others killed by the stigma, discrimination, and hatred. My name is Mimi. I am migrant trans sex worker based in Paris and president of Acceptess-T Trans Migrant Sex Workers Organization and member of STRAS French Union of Sex Workers. In 2016, despite recommendations by global and French public health and human rights organizations, France has been criminalizing clients of sex workers. Since the implementation of criminalizations of clients, we saw a huge increase in violence and murders of sex workers, in particular, trans and cis women migrant sex workers. Since the criminalization in 2016, sex workers are less able to negotiate condoms because of increased precarity, and they have to hide from the police. HIV rates have also increased among trans migrant sex workers and syphilis as well. Sex workers have fought tirelessly to decriminalize sex work and to make sure that their voices are heard and that their rights are respected. This decision by the European Court of Human Rights is a terrible setback for our communities. But it's only a setback. We will continue to fight for our rights. We will continue to demand for the decriminalization and for the recognition of sex work. Because we don't have any choice, it is for us a question of life or death. Our victory may have not been achieved by the institutions, but by conducting our class struggles and massive mobilization everywhere from the street to the parliaments, and we will be there together to grab the victory. As a worker, like the others, we need to have rights for our security, for the human dignity that we deserve. Decriminalize sex work now. Regularize all the undocumented migrants. Open the border. End transphobia, end racism, and this cynical capitalist society. And I want to say the last thing, that sex worker of all lands, we need to be united. Parce que in Spanish, we can say, la clase obrera es una y sin fronteras. We don't have border. Our solidarity is beyond the borders. We need the international solidarity in order that our community can be there in the broad rights of the victory for all of the workers of all lands. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Luca Stevenson. I'm working for the International Planned Parenthood Federation. The International Planned Parenthood Federation is a global feminist, sexual and reproductive health and rights organization with a proud history of serving and supporting sex workers across the world. We are deeply disappointed today by the decision made by the European Court of Human Rights. Although the court recognized that criminalizing the purchase of sex interferes with sex workers' rights, it also recognized the failures to implement the support supposedly included in the legislation for sex workers. However, it fell short on condemning the Swedish model as we had hoped. But we have to be clear and say it loud today. The criminalization of client and the criminalization of sex work is incompatible with human rights. Sex workers have, for decades, denounced this model as it increased their vulnerabilities to gender-based violence, HIV, and many other issues. IPPF, through our member association, serves more than 70 million people annually. 80% of them live in poverty and are belonging to marginalized communities. Many of them are sex workers, working in cities, in villages, in zones of conflicts, in refugee camps, and many other settings. We know from the sex workers that we serve and that we work with that any form of criminalization of their work makes them more vulnerable and distance them from vital health services, including sexual and reproductive health and rights services. Today's decision is a missed opportunity to affirm the human rights of the 261 sex workers who courageously took their case to the European Court of Human Rights, and the millions of sex workers who every day fight for their rights in a hostile and dangerous context. We call on the French government to repeal criminalization of clients and fully decriminalize sex work, aligning itself with human rights value and public health recommendations. Other countries which have also criminalized clients of sex workers, Sweden, Norway, Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, Canada, Israel, South Korea, also need to end this model now and decriminalize sex work. As a global feminist organization, the International Planned Parenthood Federation is dedicated to bodily autonomy for all and ending all forms of gender-based violence. But this can only happen if we work hand in hand with sex worker communities. And we are proud partners of national sex workers organizations and global networks, including the Global Network of Sex Work Projects, the European Sex Worker Rights Alliance, and Retrasex in Latin America, and many other organizations working at national, regional, and global level. Our message to sex workers and allies is clear and unequivocal. As Mimi just said, today is a setback, but it's only a setback. Decriminalization of sex work is inevitable, as we have for 50 years since the French Planning Association supported the creation of the first sex worker-led organization in France and supported their legal challenges. IPPF will continue the fight for sex workers' rights, for the recognition of sex work and the protection of their human rights. Decriminalization is not just a public health emergency, it's a human right emergency. IPPF, its member associations, stand in full solidarity with sex workers. Decriminalization of sex work is needed now. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sabrina Sanchez. I'm a sex worker and the executive director of the European of ESWA, the European Sex Worker Rights Alliance. I forgot my organization. Oh my God. Today is a very sad day. The European Court of Human Rights has squandered the opportunity to redress the injustice that the French state has been exercising since 2018, since implementation of the so-called law against the prostitutional system. It demonstrates that for these judges, some lives are disposable, especially the ones that aren't privileged like them. We deeply regret that those who are responsible for justice and for fighting for the human rights of the most vulnerable people in Europe have succumbed to the pressure of a very small but politically and economically powerful lobby. Unfortunately, this decision comes as no surprise. Sex workers in Europe and around the world have been without adequate access to justice for decades, as the court demonstrated this morning. Perhaps we were too naive to think that this High Court will be any different, but it has shown us that the European Court will continue to perpetuate the status quo, the same one that has led to the resurgence of fascism, which in France is enjoying a great momentum. Fascist collaborationism never left France. It has always been there. With this ruling, these judges have their hands stained with the blood of people like Vanessa Campos and Jessica Sarmiento, Peruvian trans women sex workers murdered at Bois de Boulogne, and those of around 30 sex workers who have died since 2018, the year in which the French law was implemented, making our work much more dangerous and criminalized. I don't want to forget all those sex workers whose mental health deteriorated so much because of this law, combined with the lack of economic and social support from the French state during the COVID-19 pandemic, that they decided to end their lives. I hope that the bad conscience of the judges will not let them sleep until the end of the days. Despite of this ruling, sex workers, we are not to magically disappear, as the structural and material conditions that drive us to engage in sex work are still there and growing, such as the rising of cost of living, restrictive migration policies, and the cuts in social spending that pro-fascist governments across Europe are implementing. Sex workers in Europe and around the world will continue to fight for our lives and continue to stand up for our right to do our work safely and with rights. just as we will continue to fight against fascism and genocide in Palestine, because no one will be free until we are free. Las putas unidas jamás serán vencidas. Las putas unidas jamás serán vencidas. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to you all. My name is Dr. Tlaleng, and I am the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right of everyone to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. And I had written to the Court of European Human Rights to intervene as an amicus in this case because I thought it of importance to bring to the court, as per my mandate, the issues that I thought were very important in addressing the cases of alleged violations of the right to physical and mental health, especially for sex workers. And I want to assert before I move on that the submission was focused broadly on how laws and policies and practices prevent and create obstacles to the enjoyment of the right to health for sex workers. And that under prevailing criminalization of either the sex worker or their client or any one of those people impartially or fully actually goes against international human rights laws. I did present some evidence around the impact of criminalization to the court and how that form of framework actually impacts the right of sex workers to actually getting comprehensive treatment that's integrated, that also, of course, includes more than just HIV. We know previously there has been a moral panic, and there continues to be a moral panic around sex workers as vectors of disease, or that public health needs to be protected from sex workers. And we know with decades of evidence and research, that is not the truth. It's the fact that there are structural barriers that keep sex workers away from getting services, health, and goods, despite having information and knowledge. And so, with the deeply interwoven forms of discrimination due to racism, but also based on gender, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, migration status, and of course, being a sex worker, this particular case in France, MNA and others versus France, was also important to highlight the different intersectional ways in which colonialism and imperialism and racism and structural discrimination compounds different outcomes for different people. And it's through this differential access to healthcare, to justice, to social determinants of health, to legal resources for redress that continue to generate and reinforce negative outcomes. France has an obligation under international law to protect the rights of sex workers. They have that obligation. And some of those rights include the rights to privacy, because if you're going to criminalize a client, to know someone is a client of a sex worker, you have to be hounding and surveilling who you think is a sex worker. You are still exposing sex workers to police harassment. Often, the relevance, I think, as well for sex workers is that the arbitrary attention and arrests are a big problem. And we know what happens there in terms of torture, in terms of cruel and inhumane and degrading treatment, all of which are also not allowed under international law. All human rights apply to sex workers. Sex workers still don't have to act in a particular way to earn their human rights. They already have their human rights. It's that the patriarchal control of women, but specifically the patriarchal control of women's sexuality regarding sex work especially, makes it a space where people think that autonomy can lie outside of the person so they can seek to control and regulate it. All the human rights are indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. And I've stated as such in various reports to the General Assembly and to the Human Rights Council. The fact that criminalization of sex work is incompatible with the realization of the right to health. And specifically under General Comment 22 on the right to sexual and reproductive health, it explicitly calls on state parties to take measures to fully protect persons working in the sex industry against all forms of violence, coercion, and discrimination. So when you have a court who then legitimizes state-sanctioned violence, we have a long way to go, and we're in really troubling stages at the moment. We know the stereotypes that goes with who is a sex worker. So if you're a migrant woman, if you are a person who's working outdoor street-based, you are a trans person, you may be using drugs, you may have had a previous conflict with the law, that heightens the amount of support and access to justice that you can get. So it's not even that when rights violations happen, sex workers can just get justice and redress. And we have to remember again that the consequences of criminalization also impacts other human rights. The right to health is an important right that unlocks the right to economic participation, to education, to participating in sports and culture, to travel even. And the approach that people take around rescue models is devoid of a truth and a nuanced understanding of the history and the context of sex work. And so partial decriminalization does not work. We know it does not work. And together with other special procedures, treaty bodies, UNAIDS, UNFPA, UNDP, even the Office of the High Commissioner, continue to call on member states through different recommendations to move away from punitive laws to actually move to decriminalization. But we also go a step further to say that they must work on anti-human trafficking laws and they should implement those, but they can't blame sex workers for their failures in tackling human trafficking. And the previous special rapporteurs who held my mandate in the right to health and have done this work before me have also asserted in the same ways that I am today that the only way forward to fully realizing the right to health and respecting human rights is through full decriminalization. Criminalization disproportionately affects sex workers and it's a structural problem. And we know that the barriers, we know even with COVID, sex workers were literally barred from accessing even the social support that governments were giving during COVID because their work is not recognized as work. They do not have the paper trail or the documentation or the sophisticated financial banking methods to prove particular income to earn, right? Private medical insurance and banking and the like. So it's important to understand that criminalization has more impact, wider impact beyond public health. In order to leave no one behind, which is this dreaded UN slogan, that we all must accept that we are leaving people behind. And today the court has unfortunately decided that it is going to leave people behind. We have to keep fighting and taking an intersectional approach to how we handle our advocacy and moving forward. We must use evidence and not morality. That's why human rights are there, that we don't have to argue about each other's humanity. Human rights are there to actually guide us in how to reform and actually bring us closer together. I support the rights of sex workers to have the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. And there must be a collective vision and an action for all of us, a world, our different countries, our different communities, regardless of what it is that places you in a vulnerable situation or whatever it is that leads to your marginalization, that you know your rights can be respected, promoted, fulfilled. Being in a vulnerable situation is not a right that people can misuse to further oppress you. And I think the links between sex work, food insecurity, housing insecurity, the global climate crisis, poverty, conflict and war is important to talk about. In the spirit of this theme of this conference, put people first. Which people are we putting first? Which people actually matter? And we know, as we understand, HIV and AIDS, especially in the early days, that it was a public health crisis. We know as the HIV community that a genocide is a public health emergency. And we ought to stand with the people of Congo, of Sudan, of Palestine as well, as they too navigate life under the crushing weight of colonial and imperial violence. And we see how the courts cannot just automatically be assumed to be there, to be on the side of the oppressed. So what does redress and accountability look like for all of us, therefore, who understand and know and operate within these systems of oppression? And so I reiterate the call to an immediate ceasefire, to an end of the genocide, and to also demand that the European government stop arming Israel, both with money and with arms. But more importantly, as we go on with our days and rethinking and internalizing what this court judgment means, sex work is work. It is about decriminalization of sex work now. We can't wait for another decade. The urgency is now. And the pain is felt by how many of our own people that we continue to lose and those we have lost. And we should say their name. We should say their name and demand that the world be better, even though they may not be here to still experience it, but that should still give us what we need to keep going forward. Finally, and most importantly, full decriminalization is the only way to go to fully respect, promote, and fulfill the rights of sex workers everywhere and put people first. Thank you.
Kulende siye zayo. Ay kulende siye zayo. Kulende siye zayo. Kulende siye zayo. Kitu valolo na tololo. Kitu valolo na tololo. Agulende siye zayo. Agulende siye zayo. Agulende siye zayo. Agulende siye zayo. Kitu valolo na tololo. Kitu valolo na tololo. Agulende siye zayo.
Asina luvalo, asina luvalo, kulento esiyezayo. Asina luvalo, asina luvalo, asina luvalo, kulento esiyezayo. Asina luvalo. Yenzayo amandla awethu yini socialism mhlaba wonke sandleni sabantu. Akuna muntu okwethu mhlaba ngayedwa. Mhlaba wonke bandleni sabantu. Akuna muntu okwethu mhlaba ngayedwa.
Aye sababu. wonke ngobefuna ukuphethezelwa sababu amandla amandla viva Sanchez, viva viva Sanchez, viva viva sex workers are human beings. Sex workers are human beings. We need decriminalization of sex work now. Now. Not later. We need sex workers. Sex work right now. LSWP,
So as this is a press conference, we're going to take some questions if they are in the zone. So, or online, they also have a streaming. Apparently no one is online. Is anyone who has a question, a comment, or whatever you want to say? You can express yourselves.
Oh, sorry, I'm Sandra from Stella in Montreal. Was out late last night, as you can tell. How angry do we need to be at everyone at this conference who doesn't seem to care about our rights? And what do we need to demand from them right now?
I think that we have to be even more voiceful. Like we are very voiceful, but it's not on us. I think that the people that has to listen to us and has to take decisions had really listened to us, not only hear us for 1 hour and a meeting and just check the box because, oh, we listen to sex worker. No, you're not listening to us. You're just hearing to us like there in the distance and checking up boxes and just tokenizing ourselves with a BS saying like, oh, the communities and really not financing the communities for a long time, not giving core funding for a long time. The opposition is financed for 30 years. We have to struggle and to hustle like hookers we are for 2-year, 3-year projects, and then we have to go again, and we have to do the reporting that is sometimes so complicated, so inaccessible for our communities that we really are doing all what we can, all what we are capable of, and more. But it is turn of the people that are here, the people that are on the conference, the people that are in the exhibition place to fund us, to listen to us, and start doing something. But yeah, the ball is in the roof.
And so for my part, first of all, I need to say that our anger is legitimate, and we don't need to say sorry, I'm angry, because you know that it is killing our comrades, it's killing our sister or brothers or sister. So the thing is that this laws is not promoting rights. This law of criminalization of clients is promoting feminicide. And that's why if you are feminist, if you are fighting for women rights, you cannot say that you don't fight for the sex worker rights. Because most of all that we see here, many women who are in sex work are the precarious women living in precarious situation and coming from a precarious country, the overexploited countries around the world. You are killing these women, you are killing the BPOC women from around the world. That's why, first of all, what we need to do, the first approach for me is that we need to mobilize ourselves, all the network of workers. I mean, the working classes organization, of course, they say they are feminists, but it's nonsense if you are saying that you are feminist and you are fighting against our rights. And if you are going to say that this law is going to protect us, no, it's in the opposition. So that's why united ourselves, and mobilize the working class around the world of all land to be united and say that there's no feminism without sex workers. There's no feminism without working class. Everyone are in the same struggle. And that's really important. The second proposition that I can say to the government, so it can be more institutional. As you see that in France, we are going to have the new government soon. So maybe after the Olympic Games. So it's ridiculous to see that you are celebrating Olympics while people are killed. Why the sex worker was just killed last week, and now people are suffering from the genocide around the world, especially in Palestine. And in the same time, I try to ask for the new coming government of France that they need to abrogate this law. They need to put this law away and put in place and implement a real full decriminalization of sex work to protect our security, to protect our rights, to be in a good healthcare and to the access to the housing. And this kind of the material realities that we are demanding is something not more than the other. It's just the basic rights. The fundamental rights of sex worker is the same rights as the others. So don't just close your eye. Open your eye, listen to us, and respect us.
Okay, just briefly, I think we need to keep being angry, and I think we need to be even more angry and need to be enraged about what's going on. About this court case, but also about many situations where our communities are facing so much injustice. We're currently living in a very dangerous time where we see the rise of the extreme right in many countries. We see in the US, Project 2025 might appear as well. There is a really well organized, really well funded anti-rights movement that has been developing over the last decades that is intended in destroying our communities. There's a huge pushback against abortion rights, against trans rights, against LGBTQI rights, against sex workers' rights, against migrants' rights. We see the closing of borders in the name of family values, in the name of white supremacy in many cases. And our communities need to be more united than ever. And we need to fight collectively for the rights, not just of sex workers or the trans communities, but for all our communities together, because we are one communities. As Mimi and Sabrina said, some of the most marginalized sex workers in France who have been victims of murder are most of them trans women, women of color, migrants. They were not just killed because of the criminalization of clients. They were killed because of the poverty they live in, because of the precarity, because of mental health situations. And we need to have a holistic approach to solve this issue, and it has to be political. So the HIV conference is an amazing space to be in and to collect with other communities. And we need partners, funders, states to understand that our issues are not just one issue. You cannot fight for sex workers' rights without centering racial justice, without centering trans feminist agenda. So we call on you on a sad day today to take a deep breath and to reach out to your friends who are going to be affected by this situation. We are worried about our colleagues in France who are going to read this and going to be even more affected by this decision. So reach out to one another, support one another, and then let's fight together, because this fight is not over, but we're going to win it. Thank you.
I have like two questions online about the positive to read in the verdict and how we can move forward in with legal action. Actually, we are considering the opportunity to make an appeal in front of the Grand Chamber. We have 3 months to decide, so we'll see if we decide to do that. And about the positive, I think it's important really to highlight the fact that the court, even if it rejects the case, recognize the negative impact of the criminalization of clients on sex workers. And it's very important for us to move forward because a European Court of Human Rights states clearly that criminalization of clients is bad for sex workers. So the politician now, even if the court didn't rule in our favor, in favor of sex workers' rights, the politicians have the opportunity, the obligation to do what they should do, to take care of everybody, to ensure the fundamental rights of everybody and of the sex workers, even because the court says so, actually, in some way.
So we have a question there, please.
Yeah, thank you for all the beautiful words. I want to ask. On behalf of Stras in France, we have now all those people on the list. We are on those lists. I wanted to ask you, but also all the others, how are you going to support those people? Because like said, there are people now afraid of being evicted. How is the support systems going to work and the organization that can do so? Thank you.
Well, that's a very interesting question. First of all, I think we have to be there for each other, like sustain us emotionally, because this is going to be this has been a hard hit. But materially, I think that that's the real challenge. I don't have the answer right now. This is something that we have to work collectively. I think that there are questions that we really need to solve also with our stakeholders, mostly with allies organization, with organizations of human rights and feminist organizations, LGBTI, we are better funded, we have better connections at the European level, at the UN level, and we have to step up our game, be more voiceful, be more proactive in saying that sex work is work. You have to decriminalize sex work for safety's sake, for safety for cis women, for trans women, for male sex workers, for male trans sex workers, for gender non-conforming people, for migrants, for Black and brown people. So our allies need also to come to step up their game. The ones that are still not so voiceful. We have amazing allies like Dr. T that has been super supportive. That I want also to appreciate and thank her all the support and all the words and all the work that she has been doing. And we had to take this example to be voiceful and don't be afraid of what your career may end, because we know the sex work issue is a career killing for politicians, for NGO people and whatever. They want to get into power only and be there, and they don't want to talk about it because I don't want to grow in this thing. So you have to be brave. If you really are a human rights defendant, you have to step up and you have to be voiceful and advocate fully for decriminalization of sex work and the funding of the sex worker-led organizations.
And practically, I mean that's we need to construct a mobilization from the bottom to the top, not from the top to the bottom. That's why what we see today, things are coming from the government, from the court to decide for us. I mean, you are the grassroots people. So all the organization, I admire like the work that Dina made in the Netherlands, Trans United Netherlands, and many organizations around the world try to push our agenda in the local organization, in the local maybe trade unions, and then to the politicians, your MPs. So you all here need to tell your MPs, write to your senators, and say that if you don't follow our recommendation on decriminalization of sex workers, of sex work, and so on, so we will not vote for you. And you need to listen to the grassroots organization around the world. And also to say that, of course, these people may not listen to us, but they cannot be there on power without us. That's why we are powerful, and don't forget that.
Like the last question, because we have to close. So just only one question from the public. And just after this, we will have, of course, with all means and with all our rage, we will have a protest, a march here, starting here from at 1 p.m. That it's in 10 minutes. 8 minutes. One question, the last question, please.
Yeah, there have been already 3 questions before you said there's only one left. Can all 3, because they already asked before?
Okay, we will brief with the answers then.
I'm Flávio Lenz from Brazil. I'm reporting for the Brazilian AIDS new agency. I'd like to have a little bit more detail about the possibility of the appeal that you're talking about in about 3 months. And also the number, the source of the number of the impact on the use of condoms that you have have said before, the 62 for 95. Maybe you can give it to me, yeah, directly, but maybe a little bit more of about the possibility of the appeal.
It's a bit difficult to answer that because we still need to talk with our lawyer about that. So that's why we do have actually 3 months to decide. There is a possibility because in front of the European Court of Human Rights, there is a grand chamber and there is a possibility to appeal. We need to consider the opportunity to appeal, and we need more time to analyze the opportunity. So I can really answer on that. About the numbers, I brought some copies and some executive summary of the survey I talked about from 2018. You won't find the drop from 95 to 62. You will find this 62 in the report, but the 95 is in a report from the High Authority on Health in France, and which is interesting. It was ready to be published in January 2016, but the government postponed the publication until May 2016 because they wanted to adopt the law before the report of the High Authority on Health, stating clearly that criminalization of sex work is bad for sex workers. That's how it works in France, actually hiding the evidence in order to criminalize sex workers.
Next question, please.
Hello. Hello, I am Sharaq Mohammadi from Morocco.
Can you put like this? Yes.
I am Sharaq Mohammadi from Morocco. This is, as we know, this is an emergency. I have a little technical question. Should we focus on decriminalizing the sex work and that will lead to the sex workers' rights, or should we maybe focus on sex workers' rights and that will lead automatically to decriminalize the sex working?
So decriminalization is not the silver bullet. In fact, decriminalization is just the beginning of a broader fight that is more like a labor rights and a more work-related fight, because we don't have to forget we live in a capitalism system, and the owners of the capital, they always want to extract more from the clients, from the workers. We see that in New Zealand, where it has been decriminalized from 20 years, but decriminalization is also a change of mindset. So the society really we acknowledge that this is a work that we acknowledge that we have rights, that labor rights, and we have human rights, and it's a small process. It's not going to come in the first 2, 3, 5 years. It will take 20, 30, but we have to start somewhere, and we have to start now.
Yeah. And just to add on that, I think decriminalization is important because it immediately removes the criminal penalty in the law that allows the space for innovation, creativity, mobilizing, discussions, participation, to then decide with all of the different stakeholders in government, civil society, what is the best way forward for that context. But under criminalization, that space is not there because people are therefore outing themselves as potential criminals, right? So decriminalization must happen with everything else in healthcare, labor, safety in the street, all of those. But decriminalization as a concept, it's very, very important to keep demanding, because that's the arm of the law. That's what the systems, the states use to punish sex workers. And under that crushing weight of the criminal system, there can be no space to even think of what meaningfully so, what things can look like for each jurisdiction.
Next question, and last.
Here. Sorry. Mauro Cabral Greenspan. Dr. T, you're a fantastic allies of our communities and movements, but I have the impression, as many of us, that human rights institutions and the national, at the regional, but also at the international level are failing us. Actually, we spend a lot of time, trying to get the attention of human rights systems, including the international human rights system. But now we have to defend ourselves against the UN, when we have UN experts that are making a career out of attacking our communities. how we can make those systems accountable. The human rights systems are supposed to be the place where our governments are accountable for human rights violations. But now we have to prove the UN that we are human, or the European Court of Human Rights. Where is the superior court or system where the decisions about who counts as human or not can be made? We don't want to undermine, or talking just myself, my organization, the independence, for example, of special procedures. But how to organize to defend ourselves from the UN? How is possible the human rights systems are targeting people, the most vulnerable communities? Is there any future in the human rights system? Because I hear you and I believe you when you are quoting human rights treaties, for example, but at the same time, they are becoming useless if people just said, yeah, all of that is true, but we are going to do this or that. So how we protect with the UN without attacking the UN? Sorry, maybe I got too emotional, but I don't know where to hide when the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women is attacking sex workers or is attacking trans people. It seems that you don't have a stone, to hide yourself from that. It directs all the hate in the world, and it's coming from institutions that were supposed to protect you.
So I'm not one for disclaimers at all, ever, if you know me very well. And I will say that you must hold everyone in the multilateral system, in the United Nations, accountable. You must. When you have the evidence that we have, when you have the credible narratives and the work that's been done over decades with sex workers and sex worker-led movements within the United Nations through various independent experts, to come to this point where you do have different mandate holders, treaty bodies, even the Office of the High Commissioner itself, reiterating over and over again that criminalization is not the way forward. Anyone else who takes a different position is clearly dissenting, right? And so we need to see it as that. And for me, what's important is to reiterate what the truth is, what it is that we want, because again, when I've been working as a medical doctor in South Africa, and many of my own patients and clients are people who do sex work. Many are people who are trans patients. So I didn't come into the UN role and now suddenly discover this activism around sex work or transgender health. I'm using this role to further promote and protect these rights through the analysis of coloniality and anti-racism and understanding intersectionality. So for me, if you are going to dissent and move away from human rights, yet you are working within a human rights institution and frameworks, I would need you to be a little bit sharper than just saying criminalize women, right? So we need to hold people accountable and demand that they explain. Part of redress is explain why you're making the decisions you are making. Show us the thing that made you, that gave you the red bulb moment, and then let's talk. But also the unwillingness to also engage in dialogue tells you already that perhaps there isn't much there really cerebrally to explain. It's all pathetic, and is an extension of patriarchal control of women. And there's nothing feminist about denying the autonomy and the agency of adult women who choose to do a particular kind of work, and saying because they do this work, they can be degraded, humiliated, treated inhumanely, and thrown into jails, right? So for me, it's really about the standard, the quality of the work that is expected of the entire UN system, including its experts, has to be solid. And when it isn't solid, but also when it's clearly dissenting from international human rights laws and standards and consensus, there is a problem. And yeah, we can't hide behind our independence. I can't be independent and have a right to destroy rights holders' lives.
So thank you very much for coming. And now we are gonna march. And the ones that want to participate in the march, you will have an amazing red umbrella. So yes, only the ones that are participating, huh? We all have they're having the we have enough.
We are going to stay here for a little while and convene. And then when we are ready to go, we will then just move. Here when now we are Zoefuna yo.